Hello.
Hi, welcome to our chat for Cozy Story Book Club, a book club dedicated to cozy fantasy books. We are here to chat about our May pick, which is Flowerheart by Catherine Bakewell. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So today we were going to chat about spoilers and cozy fantasy and all that fun stuff. So to start off, for those who maybe haven't read the book yet, tell us what Flowerheart is all about.
Sure. So, Flowerheart, I have a visual aid. It is a YA cottagecore cozy fantasy about a girl named Clara whose emotions make flowers grow. And in the story, she feels so deeply that she accidentally causes flowers to bloom in her father's chest. And the only way she can save him is by teaming up with her childhood best friend, who is now a mysterious and disgraced wizard. And she has to learn secrets about him in order to save her father and maybe even solve a problem that's plaguing the whole queendom.
And so when the book starts, Clara, as we know, has this very powerful magic. And it's essentially about her learning to control it, but also reconnect with her childhood best friend and then help her
Mhm.
father, of course. So um, when you were planning out this book, did you already know sort of the direction it was going, especially because it's like a cozy fantasy, or did it take some editing to work out the plot?
So this is so complicated answer. Um, so I started writing this book in 2016, and it was not published until 2023. So it takes a long time. But also I did a lot of editing on my own. I would say there are probably like 12 drafts of this book, and probably like 10 before it got acquired by an editor. And then for folks who aren't in the know, when a publishing house buys your book, you work closely with an editor. And it's not just that they go, here are the typos, fix them, that's your book. Or it's not that they fix the typos for you and that's it. You first go through developmental edits, which involves changing things like explain the magic system better, strengthen the relationship between these two characters, plant some more seeds about the plot twist coming at the end, those kind of things. So they're very big picture things. And usually you do 2 to 3 rounds of developmental edits. And then after that comes line edits where you make the words themselves pretty, and then you check for typos 2 or 3 times. But all that to say, um, the story has been the same, and that it's a story about Clara learning to come to love herself as messy as she is. Um, and that is really something that I focus on as the heart of my stories is the character arc, the growth that the character goes through, the emotional journey that they go through. And I usually start a book idea thinking about what is their emotional starting point and where do they need to end up. And I usually try to make these things kind of opposite. So for Clara, she starts this book thinking, I am hopeless, I'm useless, I'm a monster, my emotions are bad, to coming to this place where she's like, I'm capable, I can handle my magic. My magic does not make me a monster. I am a good person and I help people. So yeah, I focus on the character arc first and foremost.
Absolutely. And I think, especially for the cozy fantasies that I had read before this one, I think yours was really refreshing because it really focused on like the characters like internal emotions and their
Mhm.
personal journey. And I think especially for like YA, that's a really big thing, coming of age and everything. And
Mhm.
I just thought you did such a great job at showing us Clara's journey and helping her to like just appreciate herself.
Thank you.
And so I thought we could now dive into some spoilers. So we'll just be
Yeah.
going through plot points here and there, and then I'll get your thoughts and opinions on what happens here. So when it opens up, I really love that the first line was flowers. I think that was really fitting for like just the overall like ambiance of the book. And I love how you reference. I think you mentioned that there's a book that Clara's mother gave her
Mhm.
about flowers and everything, and that's sort of how she figures out what these flowers mean. Could you talk about why you wanted to include that in the book and just how you sort of figured out like what flowers mean what? Like, is this something you made up, or is it based on like real like flower language? I think that's what you've mentioned
Mhm.
before.
Yeah, I'd say that that's been a consistent core of the book as well. Victorian flower language was this concept that the flowers that you put in a bouquet, for example, they have secret meanings, and you can use them to communicate with people, usually with like someone you want to court or someone you consider a friend or something like that. For example, if you gave someone yellow roses, that would be saying, I'm like, we're good friends. But if you give them red roses, that would be a sign for passion and true love. So a lot of these flower meanings came from actual Victorian flower language meanings. And then other times I kind of made my own meanings in that I would take what are the medicinal properties of the plant, and if they were used for like soothing pain, then I would make the meaning something about like peacefulness or like restoration or something like that. And yeah, so sometimes I would use like if it was like a hardy plant that like survives in all different kinds of weather, then I would say it means like steadfastness or something like that. So a little bit of creativity, but coming up with the ingredients for potions was a very fun part of the story creation process for me.
Absolutely. And I loved, that throughout the book, obviously we see how a lot of these flowers have like deeper meaning and a lot of emotional moments of the story. And I think you pulled that off really well, especially given that this is a very like character driven story. So I loved that.
Yeah, it was very fun. The having the flowers come out when Clara has a certain feeling. It's very over the top and fairy tale, which I love, and also it's fun because it's like this very apparent and embarrassing part of Clara that she can't hide. And I think it's very fitting for all of us with really big emotions that we have trouble stifling.
Yeah, and then I was actually rereading the first chapter, like the first couple chapters, and then I remember seeing her mention a particular flower, which means lasting affection when she was talking to
Hmm.
Xavier, and
Yeah.
I just thought that whole scene was like really funny because then she just like brushes
Yeah.
it away because she knows what it means.
Yep, yeah, I and that's like, this awful part of myself is that whenever I'm reading a book anytime ever and I see a flower mentioned, I'm like, "What's the meaning? What is, like, the secret meaning behind it?" Because we're authors and we just do that, and, like, of course, like, more often than not, there is actually a hidden meaning behind it. So, that's a fun little Easter egg for the next book you read. Same thing with, A Fragile Enchantment by Alison Saft, which is a gorgeous book. There are moments like that too. There'll be flowers mentioned, and I was like, I have to go find out what this means.
Like, yes, I have to do all the research and understand the
Mhm.
hidden meaning.
Very fun.
Let's see. So when this book opens up, Clara is meeting with a magician council
Hmm.
to discuss her magic. And there she reunites with her childhood friend, Xavier.
Hmm.
And following that first few chapters, something terrible happens with her magic. And she basically has to leave her home and train with Xavier to sort of sort out her magic and get it under control. So
Hmm.
I wanted you to talk more about like um, what makes this beginning part of the book like really cozy and just really comforting. Because for me, it was definitely even when there were bad parts happening, I still
Hmm.
felt like very comforted by the story, especially with like the father daughter relationship that you build with Clara, especially. Um, Spoilers, as we learn a little bit more about her mom
Hmm.
and the relationship there.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting balance to strike because as a YA book especially, it needs to be like plotty, actiony,
Yeah.
things happening, but also I one of the feedback I got very early on when I was trying to get the book published, an agent told me I would like this if it was darker and steamier. So she was like, make it sexier, make it stabbier. And I mean, that still sells extremely well, and that's the market. And I was like, that's not what's going on here. And cozy fantasy didn't exist back then because this was before the pandemic as well. This was like 2017, 2018. Um, and so there just really wasn't as much of a space for that. So it's a really tough balance to write a book where there's enough conflict for you to keep reading, but also it's not so much that it distresses you. And there absolutely are readers who, they start and they're like, I can't read this. This is too much angst. And a lot of people will read, and the anxiety that Clara experiences is so like visceral that it's too much for them, which is totally fair. Like that's how anxiety is. So it's a tough balance, and I don't hit it for every reader. Um, but I just told the story as it was in my head. And I will also say that the relationship between Clara and her dad is a billion% inspired by my relationship with my mom, because she's the same way. She's just like always cheering for me. She's always sweet. She will always take the high road and be so kind all the time. So it was easy for me to write that relationship, and also inspired a little bit by Beauty and the Beast and Belle and her dad.
And that also leads me to another part that I love about this book as well. It gives like a very fairy tale,
Mm-hmm.
whimsical, and I just love that because I feel like obviously this is not true for all YA fantasy, but as someone who does read and review a lot of it, um I know that a lot of it is, of course, like what you said, it's very plot driven a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the times. So what I liked about Flowerheart, especially when it comes to YA fantasy, is that it it was it was nice for it to break that mold and just be like a very
Mm-hmm.
character driven, slower story. So even
Yeah.
though there's like lots of things happening, it doesn't necessarily like rush it too much. So I really liked that.
Thank you. I mean, I think that that's something I really like about fan fiction, for example, is that like I will happily read about two characters just like having a coffee shop and living their life. Like I sometimes you like to read things that are less plot driven. Um and it's hard to strike that balance. Like Flowerheart very much has like a conflict and stakes and a plot. But I think that there absolutely is a place for those for books that are just a very simple, small story that's very character driven. Um, and those are super cozy as well.
Absolutely. And then that also leads me to something else that I loved about this book, which was so cozy. It was Xavier's family house. And
Hmm.
I love how uh, I think we mentioned in our other chat too, there was a lot of details that you loved adding to um,
Hmm.
this environment, about like generations building onto the house and just like all the
Hmm.
hidden little secrets and everything of the house. And I was wondering if you could dive more into, what makes it cozy and like what was your favorite part about building this as a setting for the story.
Yeah, I think we've talked about whimsy is a big cozy fantasy thing, and definitely just this like the concept of a house being a character is always super fun and also very Howl's Moving Castle. And Studio Ghibli, it just nails the cozy vibes. For me, mostly that was born out of my love for this Nancy Drew computer game, which is a theme that'll be a theme in all of the times I talk about my books. This like nostalgia early 2000s computer game. There was a game in which there was this big family estate that's like thousands of years old, and each generation will add on to the house and add a puzzle to the house. And I just thought that was such a fun idea. So I have kind of my own spin on it where this family leaves a magical imprint on the house. And the slide is my favorite part. And that's a very silly thing and not, I don't take my books super seriously. And I think that also kind of adds to the cozy vibes that it's like, we're just here to have fun. There's I love serious books. I love books that talk that um have serious issues and delve deep into those things, and I think mine does as well. But also like sometimes your book can have a slide, and like that's okay. So there's a slide, there's the library where the books will fly back onto the shelves when you're done with them. There's the magic cabinet where you open it up and there are treasures inside. Um, and that was inspired by real life because my grandmother had this magic, she had this butter dish that had like a roll top on it. And in the mornings, we would go and visit it. And there would be little books or little toys or candy inside. And it was called the Magic Pot, which is not a name that has aged well. but so I added that cabinet as a little love note to my grandma. But yeah, just it's an odd and interesting and hopefully good thing too that Xavier has fond memories of this house and he loves the house itself, but also it kind of becomes a prison for him. And it also represents a lot of unfortunate memories as well. So it is at the same time a cozy place, but also, it has turned into something kind of sad for Xavier at the same time.
Yeah, and I think also as a cozy fantasy book, I loved um, how your novel Flowerheart just wasn't afraid to mix a lot of different moods and themes.
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes with a lot of cozy fantasy, it's always just like really happy, really hopeful, and those are obviously like a staple of what makes it like a great subgenre. But I also
Hmm.
think cozy fantasy is also a place for a lot of deeper,
Hmm.
maybe not always so happy stories.
Absolutely.
Um, so I think you struck that balance really well.
Thank you. And thinking back about Xavier's house and stuff like that, one of the very, very, very last changes that I made to the book was originally it ends where Clara and Xavier work together at his house. Like she becomes they work together as partners at his house. But then I was like, his dad would not allow that. His dad would not be cool with that. Um, and then I was kind of torn because I was like, well, this house is like so magical and fun, and it has a lot of like good childhood memories for them both, and they wanted to be more Win and Lucas, and this was their whole thing, and it would be a way for her to be like, haha, I win, Mister Master Morwin, like I'm equal to you. But I also realized that it had become kind of Xavier's prison, and that it was a sad place, and it also represented family legacy, which is something that had tied him down in so many ways. Um, so that was a last minute change that I was like, I think that he should leave and he should go find his own place. And then, tying that loose end that at the very end, we see that his mom and his sisters still want to be a part of his life. Um, but he starts a new life out there with Clara at her own house as they make a shop in her own house.
Yeah, and I loved especially how in YA fantasy I notice a lot of times like when you read a book you can sort of see where the plot is going, but I love that with Flowerheart.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was always left surprised. I was always left not knowing where things would be going, and I think like the whimsy of everything sort of added to that as well. So I love that.
Thank you.
And then next, I did want to dive more into the plot so we can discuss some more spoilers and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, so once Clara is at Xavier's house, she begins her training, and then she's also rekindling her relationship with her childhood bestie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I wanted to ask you, like how, or not how, but like what was your favorite part about like that whole segment of the book, and maybe if you want to share your favorite scene between them,
Mm-hmm.
and just like the character dynamics as well.
My favorite scene is absolutely the cliffside scene.
That
Always,
was my
always, always
favorite
my
too.
favorite.
One of my
Yeah.
favorite scenes of the whole book.
It's my favorite scene in the book too. It has stayed pretty much the same since the very beginning. Just I love moments where just like they unleash and they share their big feelings and they yell. But then also they have this very like quiet happy sad moment, which is very fun, where they just get to talk about what might have been and these moments that they wish they had together, and it's raining and it's romantic and it's very Pride and Prejudice and very Hell's Moving Castle. And also the fact that she throws this like ugly ceramic rabbit over the cliff. It's just silly and I like it. And then I always imagine the scene that takes place after the book where Xavier's mom is like, "Where's my rabbit? Where's my china? Like, where's my stuff?" And he's like, "It was an exercise. It's fine." But I love that scene. I just adore the dynamic of Xavier trying to be professional so badly because it's his like coping mechanism. And he's like, "I can be good at this one thing. I can be good at being a teacher, and I will be professional." And she's like, "Dude, just stop. Like, you're being ridiculous." So I love that dynamic of like a character who's trying to keep a facade and the other one who's like, "I see straight through you and you need to stop." So, and I love that, he calls her Miss Lucas and she's like, "We've known each other for years. You can
Yeah.
call me Clara." Which then leads to my favorite micro trope of like first usage of the first name, which gets me every time. So yeah, I love their It's like I wouldn't say it's grumpy sunshine. I would say it's like sunshine rain cloud. He's sad.
I love that. Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking too, because I love how he's just very like quiet and serious.
Mhm,
And then Clara's like, it's like she's the complete opposite, and she's just like,
mhm.
like what you said, like, I see right through you. You don't need to
Yeah.
be like that, like 24.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like I'm very biased because I've read every book that I've ever written and you all have read one or maybe two. So to me I feel like all my character dynamics are the same. But like I love a grumpy sunshine. It's just it's always so fun to like have that one character that gets under the other one's skin, but they're also like I need this. This is helping me.
Yes.
So it's fun.
And then that also leads me to another thing I really love, and in general, I think like in YA fantasy, I feel like we need more soft boy heroes. And he
Yeah.
delivered like, and Xavier is like the leader of this revolution, and I'm like, we need more characters like him.
I love it. He cries so much, and I really love that about
I love
him.
that. I love how emotional he was. Like that just
Yeah,
made him like a more like, I guess I would say like a very more in-depth character, because
yeah,
I feel like in a lot of YA fantasy, like a lot of the guy characters just aren't like that.
yeah. And I mean, like, we all know it's a consequence of toxic masculinity that
Yeah.
men are told that they can't express their emotions, they can't feel their emotions, and it's such a tiny cause for me, but I am so passionate about like boys should be able to cry, boys should be able to share their feelings, and so I like to write boys who cry because everybody should be allowed to cry no matter what your gender is. And he's also very blushy, which I just think is very cute about him. Um yeah, I love boys with big feelings. I love characters with big feelings. And also like I mean, I think that's the big storm happening inside of Xavier is that he feels the need to have it all together, but he has all these big feelings inside. And he's trying to tell Claire it's okay to have your big feelings, but also he's trying to hide his at the same time. So makes for good tension.
Yes. And I also love that I feel like I related to him because I'm the kind of person who keeps like my emotions bottled up a lot. So
Hmm.
reading this book was like a therapy session.
Oh, that's so what that is my biggest hope writing this book because legitimately so much of the book includes actual methods I learned from therapy, a lot of lessons I learned about myself and about medication as well. The lesson that they have on the cliffside about, like feel your feelings and let them go. Like that is extremely um that is cognitive CBT cognitive based therapy where it's the concept of like your thoughts are just thoughts, they aren't positive or negative, you just kind of like hear them and go okay that was a thought and let it go along. So a lot of those were ideas that I learned in therapy that I kind of tried to integrate into the story, not in a preachy way but mostly as a like this is helpful for me kind of way. But it was also when I write books, I try to think about what is some what is a lesson that I needed to hear as a younger person,
Yes.
and I needed to hear that having big feelings is okay and it's a good thing. Being sensitive is okay, because it is hard to be a sensitive person because we care so deeply, and we hurt very deeply, we love very deeply, and a lot of times people will say that that is cringy or that is foolish or whatever, and so this story is kind of a way to reach a place where for Claire at least she realizes that her big emotions can be a strength and that she is powerful and she is kind. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is also like a big part about why I think this also makes like a great cozy fantasy as well, because I think um, usually a lot of cozy fantasies are about like wellness and like they're very like
Hmm.
uplifting. So I think
Hmm.
that message comes across really well, especially
Yeah.
with the characters and like their whole journey and everything. So I love that that was a big part of the story.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then next, I did want to talk more in about spoilers as we go
Hmm.
along here. So I loved that this book was very like day to day, like
Mhm.
mundane, like with Xavier and Clara in the
Mhm.
house together, and then they're like going to the market and everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that for a cozy fantasy, it was just very nice to read because it really lets you just like sit with the characters and everything.
Yeah.
And it also got me to really love how they rekindle their friendship.
Mhm.
And it has another one of my favorite tropes, the letter writing.
Yes,
Yeah,
I love that. Mhm.
yeah. Where let's see, so if I remember correctly, uh Xavier had been writing Clara letters, but she never got them, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And this was throughout like the years they hadn't been speaking, right?
Yeah, I think it's weird because in my brain these are like actual events that happened, and so I'm like remembering back. He started to write her, and she didn't write back, and so he was like, "Oh, she's not interested," and he just never tried again. So he gave up fast
Oh,
because he was a sad boy.
Xavier, he's very sad and
Yeah,
emotional.
yeah, and also his dad was like, "You should not consort with that person," and he's like, "Okay, I want my dad to like me." And he was like 11. So
And
poor
let's see.
kids.
And I also loved how, in general, because of like Xavier being the one to help Clara, that they really just learn about each other in like a new way, and that
Hmm.
not only rekindles their friendship, but also leads to a romance as well.
Yeah.
And you have said before how you were very much inspired by the like Pride and Prejudice Victorian
Hmm.
era like time period, and I love how that's reflected in the romance because it's very like even if they're just holding hands, it's like a big deal.
Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely. Like we all think about the like Pride and Prejudice like hand twitch.
Yeah.
Like that's so iconic. If you don't know, if any viewers don't know, there's a scene in Pride and Prejudice 2005, the definitive version in my opinion, where Darcy and Elizabeth briefly hold hands. He helps her into a carriage and their hands touch, and then when he walks away, he just kind of like flexes his hand like this, and we all lose our minds because it's like he's thinking about her, he's thinking about this, he can't let it go. So I am so feral about like those just Victorian like dynamics. The yearning is what's so good. My book coming out in February is chock full of yearning. It is dual POV, and they're pining for each other, and they don't realize it. They are best friends who are pining for each other. So vibes.
Ooh, and before we continue with
Mhm.
Flowerheart, what is the title of your upcoming book called?
My upcoming book is called Where Shadows Bloom. It comes out in February of 25. It is about Lope, who is a knight, and the lady that she serves, Ophelia. And they have to fight shadow monsters and go to a dangerous and dazzling palace in order to find Ophelia's mother. And they also have to fight their growing feelings for each other. And there is yearning, and there are balls and parties, and also love poems. So, very fun, swoony story.
I cannot wait. It's already
Mhm.
on my to read list.
Thank you. I think early copies will be happening, like arcs will be happening in the next couple of months.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
Excited.
me too. It
Yes.
is it's stabbier than Flowerheart because there's like, a knight with swords and there's shadow monsters, but um soft girls having big feelings for each other is the same. So,
I love that.
mhm,
So
and
it's
there's
not
no powers.
so it's definitely more of like a traditional like actiony like YA fantasy.
Absolutely, yeah. I would not call that book cozy necessarily, but if people read it and say it's cozy, then I'll go, okay, sure. So I don't think it is. But if it's I would say it's more lighthearted than some other stuff. And it's also very pastoral in that it takes place in a lot of gardens. So there's that.
I love
So
that vibe. I
thanks.
can't wait. I love that whole like gardeny like
Hmm.
nature vibe. I love it.
Yeah, it's my brand is not necessarily cozy, but I would say my brand is definitely fairy tales. So There's just that like hopefulness and comfort in that. Um, not necessarily always cozy, but in that there will be a happy ending and everything's going to be okay.
So exciting. And in the chat, I'll see if I can link to it as well.
Thanks.
Yes.
And
So,
go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was gonna say about Clara and Xavier, the fact that them being childhood friends to lovers was actually a later addition as well. Um, Mostly it came out of the fact that I was like, they have to fall in love in like 11 days. And I was like, and so I was like, it makes more sense if they've known each other before. And so when I decided that small change, I then had to go in deep and add all of these like anecdotes and memories and feelings, and it just added way more depth to the story, and I think it made it so much better. And it adds like this whole like sense of like melancholy to the book, and that they're like, we were so close, what happened to us, and just kind of that like unique sadness of like growing up where you're like, where it's like, well, we were friends as kids, but things are different now, and that's weird. um so yeah, it was a last minute change, but it was a really good change. So I'm glad that it happened, but like I said, it came out of the fact that they had to fall in love really quickly.
Actually, that was like my favorite part, especially
Mhm.
because you know how I mentioned that I just love that it was a very character driven book. I
Yeah,
think that the whole like childhood friends romance was just so well done.
thanks.
And I don't read too many of them, but when I do, I really
Mhm.
pay attention to like the details and stuff, and I think like you totally got it. Like
Thank you. Yeah, I
the
think it adds to it too that,
yeah.
she knows him and he feels really misjudged. So I think to have, and it also explains why acts so shady around her, is he wants to kind of preserve this perfect image that she has of him, which is why he acts the way that he does. But it's also why she can be real with him. She can be honest with him because she's like, I know you and I know who you were before all this happened.
Yes, and I think it also adds to, how Clara ends up seeing him in like these different perspectives, how she
Hmm.
remembers him, but also how he's becoming or is. So I thought that
Yeah, that's
was a
right.
really great part of the story.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
And then that also leads me to my next point as we dive further into the plot. So as Clara is, learning to control her magic, she's also seeing that Xavier is doing some things behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So he may not be exactly the same person that she remembers. So I was wondering if you could dive a little deeper into that plot and where it goes from there.
Yeah. So spoilies all around. Um, so I was like, it's raining super. I'm in Paris right now, fun fact. So in the book, there is in the background this potion that's been circulating called Euphoria. And it's kind of like instant happiness. But as a consequence of taking this potion, eventually you fall into like a waking dream. And then eventually you fall asleep and dandelions grow from your skin and you can't wake up. So this potion's happening, and we see Xavier acting weird. We see that he is working really hard on a potion at night, and he's acting a little mean to Clara when this conversation comes up, or just very cold about it. And then we find out that he was the one who made this potion, and he meant it as a cure for what we now call depression. Um, and just like in real life, the cure for depression is not to be happy all the time, but it is to feel your emotions, to be able to feel your emotions. So small tangent for me. Everyone's experience is different. This is my experience. When I was diagnosed with depression, I was able to go on medication that I was worried would change my personality, but in fact, it really just kind of gave me my personality back and it gave me my energy back. Because before I was just so fatigued, like I couldn't go up the stairs. I just had no energy, no incentive to do anything. I didn't want to write, I didn't want to read, I didn't want to do anything. So, much like in this story, that medicine, when it worked for me, it gave me the energy to be myself again. So it isn't a happy pill. And so in this story, Xavier kind of pridefully, a little bit of pride, a little bit of he genuinely wants to help people. He made this potion, and also a little bit of he really wants to please his dad. He makes this potion that causes people to fall into this stupor, and all these bad things happen. So he's kind of trying to pay off this debt, and he has this arrangement with the council, the wizarding government, that if he can make the cure for this potion, he can get his full powers back. But until then, he's basically operating on half of his powers. Um, so that is his conflict happening in the background. So he's deeply ashamed about this thing that he did. And he's hiding it from Clara, which is the big conflict, is that he just refuses to tell her about it. She's mad about being kept in the dark, and she also initially thinks that he's a monster for having made this thing. Um, but as we learn, it's a very messy thing. He's extremely guilty about it, and he did truly want to help people, but also he felt pressure from his dad to be extraordinary and be a Morwen, be someone in his family legacy. But also he did not appropriately test this thing, and so he ended up leading to something that harmed a lot of people, and he's dealing with the consequences of that. So that's Xavier's burden.
Yeah, and that leads me to another like thread of the story that I thought was probably one of my favorites, and that's the idea about family. So obviously
Mm,
for Clara, it's making sure her dad is okay and undoing like the magic that she
mhm,
put on him. But then it's also about Xavier and like his family and like the expectations that they have for him and everything.
mhm,
So I loved how those two stories like really complemented each other,
mhm,
um, and especially with cozy fantasy, I think
mhm.
like the character dynamics are always like really big for me. I think that's what I
Yeah.
love connecting with. So I thought that was such a really great part of the novel as well.
Thank you. I also think that there is a third spike in there, which is Clara and her mom, because
Yes.
I think that they parallel each other, and that Xavier feels like he's living in the shadow of his dad, who's very famous and good, and Clara feels like she's living in the shadow of her mom, who's known as someone really bad. Um, so they're both kind of trying to, as you do in a coming of age story, figure out who am I, and who am I in comparison to who my parents are, and also that fear of like, am I doomed to become who my parents are? Am I my own person? What does that look like? Do I want my parents to be proud of me? Do I want my parents to be proud of me? How much does what my parents think about me matter in the end? It's a very tricky thing. um but yeah, definitely these family dynamics. And it's interesting in the context of cozy fantasy, you kind of think that like ideally it's all about like happy families and no conflict and everything's cozy and comfy. But in this case, I mean, on the other hand, found family is a common trope, and I think that is what makes it super cozy. Is that even when um, characters face adversity, or even within their own families, when they find their own people, it's so sweet, and we love it so much. And so I think that in a falling in love sort of way, I think Clara and Xavier have become each other. They belong to each other, and they've become each other's solace. Um, so, which is like one of my favorite dynamics of like they both have the same pain, and they know how to they see that in each other, and they connect in that way. So yeah, family is very important in this. And there are not so great family members. And Xavier's dad is very harsh and cold, and then Clara's mom is just a loose cannon and also neglectful of Clara. But we also have Clara's super supportive, very kind dad, even if he's a little bit naive and a little bit overbearing sometimes. And then Xavier's mom is super sweet and loving and supportive, and his sisters are also his biggest fans and very fun and sweet. So you get both, much like real life. You have family, supportive family, and not so supportive family. So there's both in this book.
Yeah, and I think also what I loved about this book was that also even amid the like family dynamics and like all of the supporting characters, I think also the romance really stood out as well because like you said, it's also about how these two main characters like complement each other and how they're like
Mhm.
learning and growing from each other, and I just loved it so much.
Thank you. It was it started from my love of Howl's Moving Castle, and the that romance is so good. That the movie, I'm thinking of the movie specifically, but the movie is so gorgeous and the romance is so swoony. Um, and something just really scratches my brain, the idea of like the girl saving the guy is so good, or like, she's healing him, she's helping him come to this realization about himself. Um, that is a very sweet dynamic in stories. Um, but also, at the same time, he's teaching her so much about herself. But I'm like trying to figure out what I want to say here. I just love this, like, they're very supportive of each other. I do love me a like enemies to lovers book every now and then, but it's also when I read books sometimes I always have to ask myself, why do these two like each other?
Yeah.
So, I want them to like have a shared sense of humor. They get along, they support each other, they believe in each other. So there's definitely that. So even whatever iciness there is in the beginning, it melts pretty quickly because they just truly enjoy each other. So that's what was fun for me too. So they do have conflict as a couple naturally, but they just like each other as people, which I think helps add to this kind of like relaxing feeling of like these two, they get along. They butt heads sometimes, but they are good natured at the end of the day.
Yeah, the way I described Clara and Xavier when I was reading it was definitely kind-hearted, and I
Yeah.
think that's a really big like I don't know, like that just really stood out to me because I think just because of like maybe the conventions of the genre
Hmm.
or whatever, I think a lot of characters end up being like, very morally gray or very
Hmm.
like, enemies to lovers. But I think what I loved about Flowerheart and why it really stood out to me was that there's just this like very present um idea that these characters are very good and they just want to
Hmm.
do what is right, and they're very kind-hearted, and I think that that also lends to a very comforting fantasy as well.
I totally agree, and that's a difficult thing too because
Yeah.
we love reading about characters that would do things that we would not do. We like
Yes.
reading about characters that do impulsive things or are jerks sometimes, or we like those. I mean, like Jude and Carden from The Cruel Prince. Like, would not recommend that dynamic for any actual human being, but it was very fun to read about. I mean, conflict is fun to read about, but also sometimes you want something that's a little gentler
Yeah.
and safer and sweeter. And also, like, I mean, they're 16 years old and they've had a lot going on. I want them to have this very sweet, gentle relationship. And I want to read about a relationship where these two people are just supportive of each other. Um, but yeah, I would agree, and just that they are both just very well-meaning and gentle people. Um, and also because like I deeply identify that I deeply identify with being like very very sad, but also caring very very deeply.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's very much the type of characters that I like to write, are these characters with these huge big deep feelings. Um, which that's what draws them to each other, is that they just care so deeply.
Yes, and I think that is also just I think a very present part of the novel as well. Like you see it in
Hmm.
like how they react to things and like how it drives their decisions.
Hmm.
And I think that was Chef's Kiss amazing. I love
Yeah.
hydrated characters.
Thanks. Yeah, and also like I mean, characters that are more closed off and snarky and like they don't share their feelings. That's useful for writers in that, they can keep secrets and they can add more
Yeah.
conflict because of the lack of communication and stuff like that. But it just didn't make sense for these two because they so desperately crave connection and being heard and understood that, they take the Clara especially takes the risk of like opening her heart and being the first to be vulnerable. And then when Xavier sees that this is a safe place to do that, especially since it's mostly just the two of them, um, they just open up a lot. So there's fewer miscommunications because miscommunications can be very annoying.
Yeah.
So there are fewer. There are still some, but there because I it's always frustrating when you're like, just tell her, which is very much happening in this book as well because there's he refuses to tell her about this thing that he did. But in my defense, I think he has a good reason for feeling that way, for wanting to hide it. Just that his own pride and his fear of losing her. He does not want to tell her about what happened in his past. So on one hand, you kind of want to strangle him for that, but also one, he's a teenager, and two, he just feels so bad about what he did that he doesn't want to just advertise that he did this thing.
Yes, and that goes back to I just love the angst of everything.
Yeah,
Like just like
there's a
the
lot.
like I feel like I'm reading like a like what would it be called? Like a Regency drama, historical drama or
Yay!
something.
That
Yeah,
makes
it
me feel
totally
very
gave those
happy.
vibes and I ate it up.
Yay! That makes me feel very, very happy. That was definitely the goal.
And then I did want to dive a little bit into like the world building.
Hmm.
So I love that there was just like a lot of different like locales, like very cozy, like cottage homes. So there's Clara's house, which she goes back and forth from. Then there's Xavier's house. And
Hmm.
then there's just like the market and like the general like landscape. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like what inspired the setting and what were some of your favorite set pieces and just like what makes it cozy for you.
Yeah, this was is very, again, very Pride and Prejudice. It's a very like English countryside. I wanted it to be just very like warm and spring summer-y and lots of colors and lots of blooming flowers. I love describing things. I have a background in poetry, and so I first I write my really crappy first draft and I just like get out the whole story. And then eventually one of the final steps is I go in and I just try to make as many descriptions as I can, just as poetic as possible. And I treat them like mini poems. And so that's the fun part, is getting to describe things in a pretty way. So creating these very pastoral environments. And yeah, just like places I wish I could be in, like these big beautiful meadows and stuff like that. And also, I guess in kind of a selfish way, like what would make cool fan art? Like that's kind of stuff that's fun for me. Yeah, very very like English cottage-y kind of vibes. Um, I'm not a soup, and it's also very like, if you had to pin it into a time period, I would say like 1870s. And the answer for why is because it was the bustle era, and I just like the silhouettes of the dresses. So that's why. I am a huge history nerd, but I hold my history very loosely. This also is a very it's a queer friendly world. There are characters of different ethnic backgrounds and of different sexual and gender identities. So I even though it's in this like quasi Victorian era, because this is a safe place is my intention. So I like, there's an Instagram creator um, whose name eludes me. I think he's called Dandy, but he says something like uh, vintage style, not vintage values, and I really love that. Of just like, or just it's for the aesthetic. So like that is, I
Yeah.
will be the first to say that. But just I love the carriages and the lanterns and the holding hands and wearing cloaks and all these things. Like that is very romantic to me. And it helps set it in a fairy tale. So that is that is the vibe. It's just very outdoorsy, summery, pastoral. Is all the things that I love.
And you also mentioned that a big like inspiration was the Howl's Moving Castle
Hmm.
film from Ghibli. And
Yep.
when I was reading the book, I was I think shortly after I had also watched the movie. So I was trying to
Hmm.
like pick and choose like okay, oh this reminds me of Flower Heart or that reminds me of Flower Heart. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love seeing the inspiration um in the movie, like being able to see like oh I can totally see like how this is in the book somehow.
Oh yeah, huge love letter to that movie. Because when I write stories, I think about like what are all the things that I love, and I love that movie. And so, very much the cliffside scene is very much the scene where he gives her a meadow, and it's so romantic and beautiful, and these bright colors.
That was the
That's
exact like image I had in my
yeah,
head when I read this
yeah.
book.
It's a very very inspired scene. Another instance is that in Kiki's Delivery Service, which is another Ghibli movie, at the very end of the movie, Tombo the boy like helps put up a sign for her delivery service on the building, and I completely forgot that that was in there. And I watched it recently, and I saw that, and I was like, "Oh no, I accidentally stole that!" So just it's like entrenched in my brain. So yeah, there's that. And I also, thinking back, I think Claire and Xavier have a very Ghibli dynamic as well, in that they're supportive of each other, and they're teammates. Um, but yeah, so absolutely inspired. Initially, I tried to write Xavier to be like Howl, in that Howl is so he's confident, he's hot, he's smooth, he gets the ladies, like all these things. Xavier failed every single I tried to write him like that, and he went like boom, 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 boom down the stairs.
Like dominoes, like nope.
Yeah, it's like no. So he has the same aesthetic kind of, except I picture him as more like String Bean. He's like a tall, skinny boy. Um, but he just became his own person, and that person was sad. So he's not. I love about how confident he is, how cool he is. But Xavier wishes he could be like that. He just isn't. He cares way too much. And he's just very, very sensitive and very sweet, and he's very sincere. So he fails at being Howl, but that's okay because I like him the way he is.
Yeah, he's
They're both wonderful boys.
He's like one of my favorite fictional guy characters. Like he's in my list of favorites. Like he's just so amazing.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, he's special. He's not Hal, and I love Hal, and every time I tried to write a guy like Hal, I just fail. So that's okay.
And when I was reading it also reminded me of another YA fantasy. I don't know if you've read this one, Nocturna, from Maya Montaigne. So that one, it also has sort of like a soft boy kind of character, and I was like, if they would meet, they would probably be best friends.
Yay! I love soft boy characters.
Yeah, so I have my favorite kind of character, and Xavier is one of those. He's
yay! I also have a huge soft spot for characters who act cocky and confident, and nothing can break them, and then you find out that they're carrying deep sadness inside of them. Yes. And then you crack open the shell and you're like, oh no! That's my favorite kind of character. So.
And then it also got me thinking about other YA characters. So this is just a hypothetical. If Xavier was to meet for example, let's say Carden, would he be scared of him?
Yes. Oh my gosh. He would hide against the wall.
He'd be like, please don't acknowledge me.
Yeah, he'd be like, this man will kill me. Carden would have a field day with this poor boy. He would have him strung up in a tree, he'd have him upside down, shaking him for money and stuff, and just hurting this poor child. And Xavier would be like, okay. There's the John Mulaney quote of you could pour soup in my lap and I would apologize to you. That's
oh my gosh.
That's who Xavier is. He'd be like, okay, this is fine. It would be interesting though if Clara was in the room, how he would change. He would be like, don't hurt my girlfriend. It's like listen, I don't want to cause a ruckus, but please don't hurt my girlfriend. So yeah. That would not go well.
And then I did want to talk about the overall setting. I know we didn't dive into that too much, but I just loved how it you give these snapshots, I'd say, of the setting, but you give enough to where the reader can just imagine what lies beyond, just from their own imagination. So I really liked that as well. And I think that also added to the coziness. So you didn't really feel the need to explain too much. And it's still I feel as a reader, I was able to still get a full picture.
Yeah, it's this is just Clara's story, and she exists in this bigger world, which is why I don't dive too much deeper into world building or magic system type things. Which I love reading about those and I love writing about those. But this is the story about her and her family and her friends. And so it's less so that like the history of the council begins in the year 1400. Like, it's not about explaining how the world works or explaining how the magic works or what's going on in Queensborough, what's going on in different countries, or if there's a war going on. It's just about Clara and her family. So in that way, it's more concentrated, which also works because I don't care about writing about this other thing. I'm recently writing a story, and I had to, on my to-do list was to write a revolution scene, and then I was like, I don't want to write that, and so I'm having a conversation instead. So that's just how I write.
And I think it also added, I guess I would also say, to like the whimsy of the story too,
Hmm.
because Clara's just, as you said, like it's very much from Clara's point of view. So with how she sees the world, like it still leaves enough, I guess, like
Hmm.
mystery, you could say. So I really love that about it.
Yeah, and I also think that, especially when you're at that age, your emotions feel so big and so all encompassing, and it feels like, all your mistakes are so huge, that it makes sense that, her whole world, her whole story is actually, very small, but it matters to her and it matters hopefully to the reader. Like that's the hard balance I have to strike of making it such that the stakes are high enough for you to want to keep reading and you to care about the characters, but not too high that you feel super stressed and sad the whole time. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you definitely got all that like so well,
Yeah.
which leads me to talking more about like how cozy fantasy, even though it has like a very like vague like term and idea, I love
Hmm.
how I believe like cozy fantasy should exist in like a giant spectrum. Like it shouldn't just be
Yep.
like one thing.
Yep. Yeah, and I would love to read more in the genre. I'm in a weird place in that I try not to read books that are too similar to any stories of my own, so that I don't accidentally get inspired or anything. I super want to read The Honey Witch. I super want to read Emily Wilde.
Oh
Super want
yeah,
to
I
read,
just got that one
yeah,
recently.
super want to read Legends and Lattes. I also have two different magical baking books in my back pocket, so I'm like, I can't touch that just yet. But I do have an adult cozy fantasy story that I want to work on after I work on my vampire story that I'm working
I'm
on.
so excited. I
So
want to read all of your cozy fantasy books.
thank you. Yeah, I would love for that to happen. But that one, like I said, when I wrote Flower Heart, cozy fantasy didn't exist, so it wasn't intentionally supposed to be like this fits in this genre. So now that I understand the genre a little bit more and what my strengths are, question mark, I want to write more in that genre. And also again, very much in that like fan fiction space of like it's okay that the stakes are small. It's okay that a lot of it's just them talking, them cooking, them doing whatever. Because I love reading books that are very plot driven. I love reading books with these like huge worlds and these huge magic systems. But also, I like to write characters talking to each other. So that's what I write about. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, and then actually, I don't know if you've kept up with a lot of cozy fantasy, but there are a couple more. I think you should add to your TBR. One is
Please.
coming out in July, The Spell Shop from Sarah Beth Durst. Have you heard of that one?
I've not.
No? Okay, so that one, it's actually going to be a future club pick for those of you tuning in. Bit of a surprise. So that one is about a former librarian,
Hmm.
and she escapes the library after like I think like a revolution or something like
Hmm.
that. And then she leaves with the spell books, and then she goes to her hometown and basically
Hmm.
sets up an illegal spell shop.
Fun. Love
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So that's another one I think you should add to your radar if you're looking for like adult cozy fantasies for
Hmm.
sure. And
Yeah.
then one that I'm really excited for is oh gosh, what was it called? I'm trying to remember the name. It comes out later this year. Let me see if I can remember it. It is called. I'm trying to remember the name. I'm trying to look it up. Let me see.
I will also say a weird thing in common with cozy fantasy books is like owning a shop.
Yeah.
That's like, I mean, my characters work in a potion shop, so I guess just something about like the conflicts of running your own small business
Yeah.
is
It's funny.
they feel big, but it's small.
I actually saw like a tweet about that
Hmm.
recently. Oh gosh, it said like so the main tweet was about like I just want to own like a coffee shop and a bookstore and like all these things, and then the quote tweet was saying something like, we want like the luxury of these spaces without like without the capitalist
Responsibility.
aspect or
Yes,
something. It's like, it's
that's
so
so
true.
true. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I do. That's so true. We want like I think also maybe it's like the Sims part of ourselves or like those video games we played growing up where it's like you run your own little shop. And
Yeah.
just I think it's that part where it's like we're serving people and we're getting to create these little things and we solve these small solvable problems as opposed to like the actual perils of owning a business.
Yes.
Or yeah, or like taxes, like those kind of things.
Exactly.
So yeah, but like the magical element is really fun. And then yeah, I mean, a shop is such an easy setting for small conflict and very like episodic events happening. Like someone comes into the potion shop asking for this kind of thing, and someone comes asking for this, and they don't have this today. So it can be easier to write in that way, or just digestible and that it's like these small scenarios. What happens to the characters when they encounter X problem in the shop?
Oh, and then I did just find that book, the other cozy fantasy book I was going to
Hmm.
recommend to you. It's
Hmm.
coming out later this year, I think in the fall. It's called The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leon.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I
So
don't
that
know
one
that
is
one.
about a traveling immigrant fortune teller. So it's very cool. Yeah.
Wow, wonderful.
And if you haven't seen the cover, go look it up. It's so pretty.
I'm looking it up.
It is gorgeous.
Can you tell me the title again?
Oh yeah, it was called The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leon.
Oh, how cute!
And it
That's a
has a
great
cute
cover.
cat on the cover and very whimsical vibes.
Love that. Do you know if it was self-published first?
No, so this one's traditionally published.
Yeah, I see so often a lot of cozy fantasies start as self pub and become trad pub, and so I'm always
Yeah,
fascinated by that journey.
I noticed that too. Yeah, especially like the adult ones.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Treason Can't Spell Treason Without T just came out, um,
Yes.
and that was the same journey. I am squarely in the. I only have experience in the traditional publishing sphere,
Mhm.
but I'm always so fascinated and inspired, and it's just the coolest thing to watch people who go on the journey of like I just wanted to write this story, and they share it, and people identify with it, and then publishing is like I would like to buy that, please.
Yes.
So I love seeing that happen, and also it's so evident that we know what's like audiences know what sells. Like, people in suits whose job is to like decide what's popular, they don't know as well as the actual readers. The
Yeah.
readers are the ones who can demand that things get published.
Yeah,
So
and they're
I
like
think that that's
we're like driving the market.
absolutely, and I think that's a super cool part of book talk, especially is like people get their books published because there's now this like obvious demand for it. I think it's super cool. And also, it's why you are so important, and all the readers and all the
Oh,
people sharing content about our
thank
books are so
you.
important. We appreciate
Absolutely.
your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I try my best. Yeah, and I
You
think
have done a lot.
especially with like YA fantasy, as much as I love, like, Caraval and like, all those big,
Mhm.
big series, I think there's a lot that get like pushed under the radar and just don't get
Mhm.
the attention they deserve.
Yes,
Um, and especially in like YA fantasy, I think there's just a lot of
mm,
like variety right now that I think people are
for
missing
sure.
out on.
Yeah, and my tiny little hill. right now is I always get tired when I see recommendation lists and it's like the same books every single
Oh
time. Like
yes,
I'm just like
trust me, like if you love those, I'm so happy for you.
yes. Oh yeah. I mean
Yeah.
it's different. It's my issue is that like I'm like Holly Black does not need the boost. Like she's good. You know?
Yeah,
I'm like, thanks
yeah.
for supporting these small authors like Lee Bardugo. I was
Yeah,
like,
or
guys,
like, oh my
like
gosh,
it's okay.
have you heard about have you heard about Six of Crows? Yeah, yes, we
I know.
have.
Yeah, or even like, if I see like Pride and Prejudice on the list, I'm like, oh, we have to support our small authors. We gotta support these unknowns. So yeah, so I love when lists include indie authors or just books that you don't see. Yeah, again, I'm just like, we don't need to put the cool prints on this
Yeah.
list. So yeah, that's it, just as like if a book has been given a bajillion dollars by the publisher, like I was like, shout out someone else. It's okay. I
Oh,
mean, I
and
still
then
love those. Like, no shame.
oh,
Just saying.
absolutely. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
love,
Hmm.
like a good popular YA fantasy here and there. But
Hmm.
yeah, I feel like especially with like subgenres like cozy fantasy, I think there's just a big
Hmm.
opportunity to support like lesser known voices.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I think, again, to encourage you and encourage any readers out there, I so want to read a book more if I hear from a reader why they loved it. Um, I love the meme about like poorly describe a book.
Yeah.
Like, that's my favorite. Like, I would be like, these two messy kids have big feelings and they make flower magic and then they throw stuff off of a cliff one time. Like that's how I describe my book. Like I would be so much more interested in reading a book when I hear about it from an actual human being, and why they loved it. So it really makes a difference for us because that's how we get people to read our books. Is if you share with your friends, share our books with your friends, request it from your library. Even if you can't buy our books right now, that is super helpful. Recommending to your friends, requesting from your library, checking it out from your library, all of those help us out for real.
Absolutely. And I think especially like with cozy fantasy, I also think that YA is really underappreciated because I see like a lot of like in the adult space for sure and like books for like younger readers, but I also think that YA cozy fantasy is like so important because it's very, I think YA is like, we all remember our teenage years, we want
Yeah.
stories that um are very coming of age. I think we
Hmm.
all, live through coming of age throughout
Yeah.
our lives. So I think that's stories
Hmm.
like that for YA are also really important.
Yeah, I whenever people make lists of like cozy fantasy books you should read and they go by age category, for YA it's like me. Basically, like me.
Yeah.
Fragile Enchantment is a new one that I love. And I think gosh, there's a few good graphic novels that are YA cozy fantasy. But I think it's just
Ooh, I'm trying
it's
to
a
think because
new
most of the
genre.
ones, yeah, like most of the ones I know of are um like middle grade.
Middle grade. I would
Yeah.
call Mooncakes would consider YA.
Oh
Um
yeah.
I think there's one called The Baker and the Bard that I need to finish, and I think it's
Yes. Oh my
YA.
gosh. Yes, I remember that.
I think Sea Dragon Society I could say is like both. I mean, you'd enjoy it no matter what age
Oh yeah.
category you're in. But yeah, a lot of I guess I mean I truly think that like I'm not like I did something original because I didn't. Like these stories have existed forever. These like pastoral stories have existed forever. I think that my editor took a chance on my book at a time when there weren't really books like mine. And the way that publishing works is like it takes years for books to come out. So they bought my book in like 2021. Um, like just right before this wave existed. So then when it came out, it was like at the peak of the wave.
Yeah.
So which means that like now currently we will see more. I bet we'll see a big wave of cozy fantasy books like next year and then the year after that, because it takes about 2 to 3 years for a book to go from idea to being on the shelf. So for all the people who are like, oh, cozy fantasy exists now, I want to hop on that wave. It'll take about 2 to 3 years before we see those books. So, but we want more. So keep writing them.
I actually want to write my own, but I'm like
You
I
should.
always struggle with like because I feel like I have to actually just sit down and write it, and I'm like I
Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
Well, I would love to share. I'm always happy to talk about writing, and I will share a few of my little writing thoughts. Something I do is I will set a timer for 15 minutes, just 15 minutes, and then once I've written for 15 minutes, doesn't matter how many words, just straight 15 minutes, I give myself a little sticker.
Oh,
And then so then by the end of the day I can look at my little sticker book and I can see how many stickers I have, and that's proof to myself of like, here's how much work I did today. um, and that feels really good. And then also my lizard brain wants to have more stickers, and so I'm like, I can do 15 more minutes. So that's a good way to write. I also love, there's a website called For the Words, number four the words, and you fight against little monsters, and you have, you have to write 200 words in 25 minutes or else you'll lose the battle. And so it's kind of like a tiny video game, and so that can be fun. um, Free write is a device that's very expensive. So I don't necessarily recommend it, but they have a website that helps you write, um, that can help you write quickly. It'll be like a 15-minute sprint, and it's just a very plain website and such that you won't get distracted, and you can see the timer counting down. So that's a free website you can use. I'm going to check what the name of it is, just so I like website. Da, 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 da. Oh, can't find it at this exact moment, but it is very, yeah. So that's a great website too, and I can share some resources that you can pass along later. Um, but yeah, it's the scariest part is knowing that you're writing something that's bad, because the first draft will always be bad. But as we were talking about flowers, you have to fertilize your garden with crap before it can before the flowers can bloom. So you have to put down the first draft, and I often tell myself first draft, no rules. So I'll also, the whole time I'm writing, the little voice in my head is like, this is bad, this is unoriginal, this is a bad description, this sounds all the same, all your characters are the same. This is like all the critiques. I'm fully aware of them, but you just have to get it down on paper because you can't edit something that isn't there. So you absolutely should. Everybody, I think anybody can write a book, just like in Ratatouille. Anyone can cook. So just, it's scary, and also take comfort in the fact that you don't have to share your first draft. Nobody has to see it but you.
that's so true.
Yeah,
But sometimes I even get like I always feel like I get distraught because I'm like I'm the one who's reading it. I know it's terrible,
hmm,
you
that's
know.
okay. You're the only one though. Nobody
That's
else is
true.
judging. And I also will say, write something that's like a big soup of all the things that you love. So I am a big history nerd. I'm a big music nerd. I'm a big language nerd. And so even, when I'm writing it, I was like, no one's going to care about this but me. Eventually you find out that your book does matter to someone. And that possibility of your book connecting to someone is really the reward that I chase. Also, now that I'm like an author, which is weird, audiobooks are the thing that I chase, because hearing my books read aloud by these very talented actors is so so cool. So highly recommend the Flowerheart audiobook if you haven't heard it. It's
Ooh,
very,
I
it's
had no
lovely.
idea it had an audiobook.
Yes, it sure does, and it has this.
Oh,
The lady who reads it is British, and she does all these different British accents for the characters, and it's so cute. I love it.
I'll have to go check it out then,
Yeah,
for
you could get
sure.
it at your library, and then also Spotify. I believe if you have a membership, you can listen to, I think, like 15 hours um, a month, and I believe Flowerheart is like 9 or 10 hours, so you can knock that out really quick. But it's lovely. Yeah.
Right. So I know we've been here a bit over an hour, so we're just gonna
Mhm.
wrap it up in a couple of minutes. So to end our Flower Heart discussion, I wanted you to share for those who maybe had just tuned in or
Mhm.
are, gonna pick up Flower Heart. Tell them, as a cozy fantasy, why they should pick it up and why they should add it to their to read list.
So here it is again. Here's that beautiful cover. So Flowerheart is great for anybody who is just a super sensitive person. If you've got big feelings, this is a book for you. It is a very gentle, sincere, earnest story. It is available in hardback, paperback, Russian, French, Polish, Spanish, um, and audiobook and ebook. If you can get it from your local library, you can request it from your local library. Um, I appreciate you reading it. It has kind of sunshine, not grumpy sunshine, but sunshine rain cloud dynamics. It has a soft boy, cinnamon roll boy, and a girl with who's just a spitfire. She's got big feelings, and she's determined to fix this boy and take care of him and make him get a nap. So just these very sweet characters. If you loved Howl's Moving Castle, if you loved the vibes of that, that's this kind of story. Um, and yes, I would call it a cottagecore cozy fantasy. So also they work in a potion shop. So if that's compelling to you, you might want to read Flowerheart. And because I love to shout out friend books, if you have read Flowerheart and you'd enjoyed it, I recommend reading Unseelie by Evelise Hausman. She's a dear friend of mine, and we say often that our books are primas, our books are cousins. And then my friend Allison Saft recently published a book called A Fragile Enchantment. First of all her books are drop dead gorgeous, and you should read all of them. But in the niche of cozy fantasy, um, A Fragile Enchantment definitely fits there. It's great for if you've just gotten over your Bridgerton hangover. It's very much that because it is a Regency era romantasy with flower magic and with sewing magic. And I will also say, pinging off of that, if you like the sewing magic and just like the whimsy and the fairy tale vibes, Splinters of Scarlet by Emily Vane Murphy is another one of my ultimate favorite YA books. Would not call that one cozy necessarily because there's like a murder mystery going on, but it is wintry. It's very Downton Abbey and takes place in this fancy house. It takes place in the 1800s in Denmark. That's called Splinters of Scarlet, and it is a lovely book. Love that one. So thank you for having me. You can find me on Instagram at catbake, CATBAKE. And I am there all the time, and I love talking about writing. If you ever have any questions about my book or about writing or need advice, I am here for you. I love talking about this stuff. And I was in your shoes querying agents and starting this journey not very long ago. So I am here at your service. So thank you again for boosting my book and for reading it and for discussing it. I'm so lucky to have found readers. I'm very, very lucky.
Absolutely. And I've really been wanting to discuss this book ever since I read it last year. And, we had our first little chat, and, I was
Mm,
getting more into cozy fantasy, and I really wanted to have a discussion with you and like discuss everything that happened, the characters, inspiration, all of that good stuff. So I'm so glad we
thank
can have this chat.
you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And to finish off the chat here, you can follow my Cozy Fantasy Book Club. If you love cozy fantasy books, reading cozy stories, at Cozy Story Book Club on Instagram. We're usually active there. We also have a Fable, but you can just follow our Instagram. You'll get all the info there. And for next month, for June, we will be discussing Sula Sullivan, another cozy fantasy author. She writes black cozy fantasy historical romances. And we're just going to have an author spotlight on her. So if you haven't picked up her books, please do. We'll be reading her books for June.
Yay!
So thank you so much again, Catherine, for joining me. I had an amazing discussion. It was so fun. And hopefully we can chat again in the future about your upcoming books.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had a great time.
Absolutely. And we will end the stream here. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.